Judge Ronald Grayson banged his gavel so hard it echoed through the courtroom. His face was red with anger, his lips twisted in a scowl. "I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my court," he shouted. Across the room, Janelle Carter, a sharp-witted defense attorney, stood firm. She had just challenged a judge on a ruling that was clearly unfair. Her client, a young black man named Marcus Willis, was being railroaded by a system designed to keep people like him down. Janelle had seen it before, but today she had had enough. "You are out of line, Miss Carter," Judge Grayson sneered. "Bailiff, remove her from my courtroom immediately." Gasps filled the room. The bailiff, a tall man in a Navy uniform, hesitated. He knew this was wrong, but before he could take a step, a loud, buzzing sound filled the air. The courtroom phone rang. The clerk picked it up, her face turning pale as she listened. Her voice trembled as she looked up at the judge. "Sir, it's the White House." The entire room fell silent. Judge Grayson's face turned white as a sheet. He swallowed hard, his hand frozen midair as he clutched his gavel. The tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Janelle's heart pounded in her chest. Who could be calling? And why? Everything had changed in an instant. That morning, Janelle had woken up knowing it was going to be a tough day. The case of Marcus Willis was one of the most difficult she had ever taken. He had been accused of a crime he didn't commit, stealing from a jewelry store. The only evidence against him was a blurry security camera image that barely looked like him. Yet the prosecution was pushing for the maximum sentence. Janelle had spent weeks gathering proof of his innocence, but Judge Grayson had blocked every attempt she made to present it. He ruled against her at every turn, allowing the prosecution to do whatever they wanted. It was clear this was not justice. This was personal. Judge Grayson had a reputation. He was an old-school judge who believed in law and order, but that really just meant he did not care for people like Janelle or Marcus. He had ruled against black defendants and attorneys for years, making sure they lost their cases before they even had a chance to fight. Janelle knew the odds were stacked against her, but she refused to back down. She had seen too many innocent people thrown behind bars because no one fought for them. Today, she would not let that happen to Marcus. When she arrived at the courthouse, the tension was already high. The prosecution smirked as they walked past her, confident they had already won. Janelle ignored them and took her seat at the defense table beside Marcus. He was nervous, his hands shook slightly, and his eyes darted around the courtroom. "Stay strong," Janelle whispered to him. "We are not giving up." The trial began, and as expected, Judge Grayson made things difficult. Every time Janelle tried to present evidence that could prove Marcus was innocent, the judge found a reason to shut her down. "That's irrelevant," he said. "Objection sustained," he ruled. "We will not waste time on that," he dismissed. Janelle's frustration grew with each passing minute. The jury looked uncomfortable, sensing the unfairness of it all, but they couldn't do anything. It was Judge Grayson's courtroom, and he ran it however he pleased. Finally, Janelle had enough. She stood up, her voice strong and unwavering. "This is not justice," she said. "You are not even pretending to be fair. You are railroading my client, and I won't stand for it." The room went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at Judge Grayson, waiting for his response. His face darkened, his eyes burning with fury. "You will not question my authority in my courtroom," he growled. "If you cannot follow the rules, then you will leave." Janelle crossed her arms. "The rules? Or your rules?" Judge Grayson slammed his gavel. "Bailiff, remove her." The bailiff hesitated. The tension in the room was thick with uncertainty. And then the phone rang. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the sound. The court clerk picked it up, listening intently. Then she looked up at Judge Grayson with wide eyes. "Sir, it's the White House." Judge Grayson's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone. Janelle watched him, her heart racing. Who was on the other end of that line? Why was the White House calling? Whatever was about to happen next, it was going to change everything. Judge Grayson's fingers twitched as he reached for the receiver. The entire courtroom held its breath. The bailiff, who had been ready to remove Janelle, was frozen in place. The jury, the prosecution, even the clerk, all eyes were locked on the judge. Janelle crossed her arms, refusing to look away. Whatever was happening, she knew it was big, and if the White House was involved, there was no way Judge Grayson could ignore it. Slowly, he lifted the phone to his ear. "This is Judge Ronald Grayson." The voice on the other end was too low for anyone else to hear, but whatever was being said made the color drain from Grayson's face. His grip on the receiver tightened. His jaw clenched. He muttered a few short responses. "Yes, sir. I understand." "No, sir, that won't be necessary." "Of course, sir." When he finally hung up, his hand was shaking. Janelle raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong, Your Honor?" The judge hesitated, looking around the room as if searching for an escape. He adjusted his robe, cleared his throat, and sat up straight, trying to regain control. "There will be a short recess," he announced abruptly. His voice wavered slightly. Murmurs filled the courtroom. A recess? Right in the middle of him throwing Janelle out? Something wasn't right. The jury was let out, and the courtroom began to empty. Janelle turned to Marcus, who looked just as confused as she felt. "What just happened?" he whispered. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." Judge Grayson wasted no time disappearing into his chambers. His robe billowed behind him as he slammed the door shut. Janelle didn't leave. She wasn't done. She grabbed her phone and quickly texted a trusted contact in Washington, D.C., a journalist named Eric Caldwell. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. "Janelle, something strange just happened in court. The White House called Judge Grayson in the middle of my case. Any idea why?" She watched her screen anxiously. A few moments later, the typing dots appeared. "Eric, the White House. Are you serious?" "Janelle, dead serious." "Eric, give me a few minutes. I'll check into it." She exhaled. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just a corrupt judge. As she slipped her phone into her pocket, the courtroom door swung open. The prosecution attorney, Jacob Harlow, stormed in, looking furious. He made a beeline for the judge's chambers and banged on the door. "What the hell is going on, Grayson?" he demanded. Silence. Harlow knocked harder. "Open this damn door." Still nothing. Janelle watched closely. Something was definitely wrong. Judge Grayson had never backed down from a fight in his life. Now he was hiding? A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Eric, I don't know how to say this, but the president himself may have just gotten involved in your case." Janelle's stomach flipped. "Janelle, what? Why would the president care about a small-time trial?" "Eric, because it's not small-time anymore. Word is a high-profile person saw the footage of your trial, and they were not happy about what Grayson was doing." Janelle sat down, tried to process the information. This case was about to explode. She barely had time to think before the courtroom door flew open again. The bailiff looked pale as he stepped forward. "Miss Carter, the judge wants to see you." "In his chambers." Janelle didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." She walked past Harlow, who glared at her. "Whatever you did, you won't get away with it," he hissed. Janelle smirked. "Watch me." She followed the bailiff down the hallway. Every step she took felt heavier, the air thick with tension. When she reached the judge's office, the door creaked open slightly, as if he had been waiting for her. Judge Grayson was sitting at his desk, his hands clasped together. He looked nervous. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Janelle didn't move. "I'm fine standing." Grayson sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Miss Carter, you have no idea what you've done." Janelle folded her arms. "I've done my job." The judge shook his head. "You don't understand. I just got a call from someone very high up, and they told me, in no uncertain terms, that if I do not allow you to present your full case, my career is over." Janelle's heart skipped a beat. "Good," she said flatly. Grayson clenched his jaw. "You think this is a victory? You don't know what you started." "I started nothing." "You did when you tried to railroad an innocent man." Janelle shot back. "Now let's get back in that courtroom and do this the right way." Grayson glared at her, but there was something different in his eyes. Not just anger. Fear. Janelle turned and walked out. The moment she stepped into the hallway, she exhaled deeply. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she had the upper hand. As she made her way back to the courtroom, her phone buzzed again. "Eric, you need to be careful, Janelle. I just heard something else." She frowned. Janelle, what? Eric, someone powerful is really pissed off that this case is getting attention. I don't know who, but I heard one thing for sure. Janelle, what? Eric, they don't want you to make it to the verdict. Her stomach dropped. For the first time all day, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. This was a fight for survival. Janelle tightened her grip on her phone, reading Eric's last message again. They don't want you to make it to the verdict. A cold wave washed over her. She had handled difficult cases before, but no one had ever directly threatened her life. Whoever was behind this wasn't just playing legal games. They were playing for keeps. She glanced around the courthouse hallway, suddenly feeling exposed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Court staff moved past her, their voices blending into a dull hum. Nothing seemed out of place, but she knew better. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and headed back toward the courtroom. She wasn't going to back down now. If anything, this only proved how important it was to see this case through. As she entered, all eyes turned to her. The tension in the room had doubled. Judge Grayson was already seated, his expression unreadable. The prosecution sat stiffly at their table, whispering amongst themselves. Marcus looked anxious, but hopeful. Janelle took her seat beside him. You good? Marcus whispered. She nodded. Yeah, let's finish this. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, his voice strained. We will resume trial proceedings. He paused before glancing at Janelle, his tone forced. The defense may proceed with their evidence. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. It was the first time all trial that the judge had actually allowed Janelle to present something without a fight. The jury looked more alert, sensing the shift. Janelle wasted no time. She stood up and walked confidently to the center of the room. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce video evidence that was previously dismissed. Grayson hesitated, then nodded stiffly. The bailiff wheeled out the courtroom TV, and Janelle handed over a USB drive. The screen flickered to life, and she hit play. The grainy security footage from the jewelry store appeared. The original clip the prosecution had shown only played a short, blurry section of a hooded figure. But what they had conveniently left out was the full version. Janelle let the video continue past the point where the prosecution had stopped it. Seconds later, the figure turned toward the camera, just enough of the face to be seen clearly. It wasn't Marcus. The courtroom gasped. Janelle turned to the jury. This is the man who actually committed the crime, not my client. The prosecution scrambled. Objection. This evidence should not be admissible. Judge Grayson hesitated, but the pressure was too much. His face was tight with frustration, but his hand were tied. Overruled. Janelle didn't let up. Your Honor, I also have witness testimony that further proves Marcus Willis was nowhere near the crime scene at the time of the robbery. The judge rubbed his temples, as if battling an internal war. But he finally sighed and nodded. Proceed. Janelle turned toward the courtroom doors. The defense calls to the stand. Bam! The doors burst open. A group of men in dark suits stormed into the courtroom. The entire room froze. Janelle felt her pulse spike. Were these federal agents? Police? Who were they? One of them, a man with sharp blue eyes and a stone-cold expression, stepped forward. He pulled out a badge. Apologies for the interruption, he said in a deep, commanding voice. We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The air in the room shifted. The FBI? Judge Grayson paled. And what business do you have here? The lead agent didn't blink. We are placing this courtroom under federal observation due to allegations of judicial misconduct. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The entire case had just exploded. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. The jury exchanged stunned glances. The prosecution looked like they had been punched in the gut. Judge Grayson swallowed hard. On whose orders? The agent's lips curled slightly, almost like he was enjoying this. Directly from the Department of Justice. He took another step forward, his piercing gaze locking onto the judge. And you, Judge Grayson, are under investigation. Dead silence. The judge's hands trembled slightly. Janelle could see the sweat beading on his forehead. What? Grayson stammered. The agent didn't even flinch. Sir, we strongly advise you to comply. Janelle could barely believe what she was witnessing. The man who had ruled over this courtroom with an iron fist was now being confronted by the highest legal authority in the country. For the first time in his life, Judge Grayson wasn't the one in control. But as Janelle watched his reaction, something didn't sit right. He was afraid, but not surprised. It was almost as if he knew this was coming. And that meant one thing. Someone had warned him. Janelle's gut twisted. If the FBI was only now stepping in, that meant whoever had been trying to stop her before was even more powerful than them. And that terrified her more than anything. This wasn't just corruption. This was a cover-up. And now, Janelle wasn't just fighting for Marcus. She was fighting to uncover the truth before it was too late. Janelle's mind raced as she watched Judge Grayson's face drain of color. The FBI's presence had thrown a grenade into the middle of the trial, but something about the way Grayson reacted didn't sit right. He wasn't just nervous. He looked like a man who knew something worse was coming. The lead FBI agent, the one with the icy blue eyes, took another step forward. "Judge Grayson, please step down from the bench." The judge hesitated for a second, gripping his gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a moment, Janelle thought he might actually refuse. But then, with a slow, almost painful movement, he stood up. His robes billowed slightly as he stepped away from his seat, the seat of power he had ruled from for years. Whispers filled the courtroom. Some of the jurors looked at each other in shock. Even the bailiff seemed unsure of what to do next. The lead agent didn't take his eyes off the judge. "We'll discuss the nature of the investigation in private." His voice was calm but firm. "Until further notice, this trial is suspended." "No!" Janelle shot up from her seat. All eyes turned to her. She pointed straight at Marcus, who was still seated beside her, looking just as confused as everyone else. "You can't suspend the trial now. My client is innocent, and the evidence is right here. We were just about to prove it." The agent turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter, I understand your concern, but this situation is beyond just one trial. We have reason to believe this courtroom, this entire courthouse, is compromised." Janelle frowned. "Compromised? By who?" The agent didn't answer right away. Instead, he exchanged a glance with the other FBI agents in the room. Then, after a beat of silence, he turned back to Janelle. "You might want to come with us." Janelle's heart pounded. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were already rushing toward the doors, no doubt racing to be the first to break the story. The prosecution attorneys looked shell-shocked, completely thrown off their game. The jury members were murmuring among themselves, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Marcus turned to Janelle. "What's happening?" he whispered. "Are they shutting everything down?" Janelle clenched her jaw. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." She turned to the FBI agent. "Fine, let's go." The agent nodded and gestured for her to follow. Janelle grabbed her briefcase, threw one last glance at Marcus, and then walked toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, two other agents flanked her sides. This wasn't just a simple conversation. They were escorting her. This was serious. They led her down the long, marble-tiled corridor, past the murmuring court staff and lingering attorneys. The tension in the air was thick. People whispered as she walked by, their eyes darting between her and the federal agents. Finally, they reached a private conference room. The agent with the blue eyes opened the door and motioned for her to enter. Janelle hesitated for just a second, then stepped inside. The door shut behind her. The room was dimly lit, with a long wooden table in the center. There were no windows, just one flickering fluorescent light overhead. Two more agents were already inside, waiting. The lead agent pulled out a chair. "Have a seat, Miss Carter." Janelle sat, keeping her face neutral. "All right. Now, are you going to tell me what's really going on?" The agent sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "First, let me properly introduce myself. My name is Special Agent Cole Weston, and I specialize in high-level corruption cases." Janelle narrowed her eyes. "Corruption?" He nodded. "Miss Carter, what you're dealing with is much bigger than a crooked judge. Judge Grayson is just one piece of a very large puzzle." Janelle stayed silent, waiting. Agent Weston continued. For years, we've been investigating a network of judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials involved in systematic case rigging. They've been ensuring that certain defendants, mostly black and low-income individuals, never stood a chance in court. Janelle's blood ran cold. We believe Judge Grayson is one of the key players in this operation, Weston said, and someone very powerful has been protecting him. Janelle's hands curled into fists. Ooh, Weston hesitated. Then, he leaned forward slightly. That's what we're trying to find out. Janelle exhaled sharply. So what does this have to do with me? Weston's expression darkened. Because, Miss Carter, you weren't supposed to make it this far. Janelle's heart skipped a beat. You pushed too hard, Weston continued. You exposed too much. The people behind this? They don't like that. That's why we had to intervene. Janelle sat back in her chair, processing his words. So what happens now? She asked. Weston exchanged another glance with the agents beside him. Then, he turned back to her. You need to disappear for a while. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Excuse me. Weston's voice was steady. These people don't just destroy cases, Miss Carter. They destroy people. And if they think you're a threat, they won't hesitate to come after you. Janelle felt a chill run down her spine. No, she said firmly. I'm not running. Not when Marcus is still in danger of going to prison for something he didn't do. Weston sighed. Miss Carter. No, she repeated. I fought too hard for this. I'm not going to hide. The room was silent for a moment. Then, one of the other agents spoke up for the first time. She's right. Janelle turned toward him. He was younger, maybe in his early 30s, with a serious expression. If she backs down now, they win, he said. And that means more innocent people are going to get buried by this system. Weston's jaw tightened. He studied Janelle for a long moment. Then finally, he sighed. All right, he said. Then we do this the hard way. Janelle raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Weston leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. It means we take the fight to them. Janelle's stomach flipped. Whatever was about to happen next, it was going to be dangerous. And it was going to change everything. Janelle stared at Special Agent Weston, her mind racing. We take the fight to them. His words hung heavy in the air. Janelle had spent her entire career fighting uphill battles in the courtroom. But this was something else. This wasn't just about getting Marcus a fair trial anymore. It wasn't even about exposing Judge Grayson. This was about tearing down an entire system of corruption. Janelle leaned forward. What exactly do you mean by taking the fight to them? Weston steepled his fingers. We believe there's someone, maybe multiple people, pulling the strings behind this network. And if we don't act fast, they'll bury this case before the truth ever sees the light of day. Janelle exhaled. You're saying that even if we prove Marcus is innocent, they'll find a way to cover it up? Weston nodded. Exactly. That's why we can't just prove Marcus's innocence. We have to expose the entire operation. Janelle sat back, processing his words. The weight of what he was asking settled heavily on her chest. All right, she finally said. What's the plan? Weston's lips curled into a small, approving smile. I thought you'd never ask. An hour later, Janelle was back in her apartment, pacing the floor. Weston had laid out the plan in detail. They needed undeniable proof, evidence that could take down not just Judge Grayson, but the entire network protecting him. And they needed the problem? The people behind this were powerful and dangerous. Janelle's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it off the table. It was Eric, the journalist. She answered. Tell me you have something. Eric's voice was hushed. I do, but you're not going to like it. Janelle frowned. What is it? There was a pause. Then, in a low, serious tone, Eric said, Janelle, someone's following you. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. What? I've been tracking some unusual activity ever since the White House call, Eric continued. And I just got confirmation someone's been watching you. Your movements, your cases, everything. Janelle swallowed hard, her mind flashing back to what Weston had said. If they think you're a threat, they won't hesitate to come after you. She walked over to her window, her pulse pounding in her ears. Carefully, she pulled back the curtain just an inch, enough to peek outside. Her heart nearly stopped. A black SUV was parked across the street. The windows were tinted. The engine was still running. Someone was inside, watching her. Janelle quickly stepped back from the window, her mind racing. Janelle. Eric's voice came through the phone. She swallowed. They're here. There was silence on the other end. Then Eric cursed under his breath. Listen to me. You need to get out of there now. Janelle exhaled. She had two choices, stay put and hope they didn't make a move tonight, or take the fight to them. She wasn't the type to wait for the enemy to strike first. Her decision was made. Eric, she said, can you track where that SUV came from? Eric hesitated. I can try, but... Do it, Janelle cut in, and text me as soon as you have something. She hung up before he could argue. Then, taking a deep breath, she grabbed her coat, slipped on her sneakers, and grabbed the small stun gun she kept in her purse. If they were going to follow her, she was going to lead them somewhere they wouldn't expect. It was time to turn the tables. Janelle walked out of her apartment complex as if nothing was wrong. She kept her shoulders relaxed, her stride casual. But inside, her adrenaline was spiking. She crossed the street, heading toward the subway station a block away. The SUV didn't move. Yet, as she neared the station, she took a sharp turn into a dimly lit alleyway. A risky move, but it was exactly what she needed. Seconds later, she heard it, the low hum of an engine. The SUV had started moving. Janelle picked up her pace, her heart pounding. She slipped through a side exit in the alley, cutting through a narrow pathway between two buildings. She knew this neighborhood like the back of her hand. If they wanted to follow her, they were going to have to work for it. She ducked through another alley, emerging onto a different street. Then she saw it, another black SUV. Her stomach twisted. They weren't just following her. They were surrounding her. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed a way out. Fast. Her phone buzzed. A message from Eric. Eric, I traced the SUV. Janelle, you're not going to believe this. It's registered to a private security firm. A high-level one. The kind that only billionaires and government officials hire. Janelle's hands clenched around her phone. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just some corrupt cops or local officials. They were powerful, and now they were closing in. A door opened behind her. Janelle spun around, just in time to see a man in a dark suit stepping out of one of the SUVs. He was tall with sharp, calculating eyes. He smiled. Miss Carter, he said smoothly. We need to have a conversation. Janelle's blood ran cold. She took a step back, but another man emerged from the other side of the street, blocking her escape. She was trapped. The first man took a step closer. You've been making a lot of noise. Important people don't like that. Janelle squared her shoulders, masking her fear. Too bad. I'm not stopping. The man smirked. Oh, we know. Then, before she could react, he pulled something from his pocket. A syringe. Janelle's heart stopped. Everything happened in a blur. She lunged backward, but the second man grabbed her arm. She struggled, kicking, twisting, but he was too strong. The first man raised the syringe. We can do this the easy way, or... Before he could finish, Janelle did the only thing she could. She stomped down on the second man's foot with all her strength, then slammed her elbow into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough. Janelle ripped her arm free and ran. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she darted down the alley, dodging trash cans and leaping over a puddle. She could hear them chasing after her, their footsteps slamming against the pavement. But Janelle wasn't running blindly. She knew exactly where she was going. Ahead of her, an old metal fire escape hung just a few feet above the ground. With one desperate leap, she grabbed the railing, scrambled up, and hauled herself onto the second-story landing. Below, the men cursed. She didn't stop. She kept climbing, her muscles burning, until she reached the rooftop. She looked down. The men were still on the ground, watching her. One of them was already pulling out his phone, probably calling reinforcements. Janelle didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran across the rooftop, her breath coming fast. She needed to disappear. Fast. Because this wasn't just a warning anymore. They had just tried to take her. And that meant one thing. She was getting too close to the truth. Janelle's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted across the rooftop, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The wind whipped against her face, but she didn't dare slow down. Below, she could hear the men shouting orders, scrambling to find another way up. She had only seconds. Reaching the edge of the roof, she spotted another fire escape leading down to the adjacent building. Without thinking, she swung herself over and began climbing down as fast as she could. Halfway down, she heard tires screeching. She glanced over her shoulder. A third black SUV had arrived. Her stomach twisted. Who were these people? She jumped down the last few feet, landing hard on the concrete below. Pain jolted through her ankle, but she ignored it, pushing forward. She darted through a narrow alley, zigzagging through garbage cans and discarded crates, then burst out onto a crowded street. People. This was her chance. She slowed her pace just enough to blend in, yanking up the hood of her jacket. Her hands trembled as she tried to control her breathing. Keep moving. Don't look back. She slipped into the flow of pedestrians, forcing herself to act natural. A mother pushed a stroller past her. A man in a business suit talked loudly on his phone. A street vendor shouted about hot dogs. It was all so normal, yet she felt anything but. Then, her phone buzzed. She hesitated for a split second before pulling it out. A message from Eric. Eric, Janelle, where are you? They're monitoring your location. Turn off your phone now. Her heart leaped in her throat. She looked around. No one seemed to be paying attention to her. But she knew better now. She had already made one mistake, letting them track her this far. She gritted her teeth, then powered down her phone and yanked out the battery. No more digital breadcrumbs. Now, she was on her own. Janelle kept walking for nearly 20 minutes, taking random turns down streets she barely knew. Finally, when she was sure no one had followed her, she slipped into a small, run-down diner on the corner of 52nd Street. The smell of coffee and greasy burgers filled the air. A tired-looking waitress glanced at her, but didn't say anything. Janelle made her way to a booth in the far corner, her back against the wall, so she could see the entrance. Her hands were still shaking. What just happened? She had dealt with corrupt judges, biased prosecutors, and rigged trials before, but this was something else entirely. They had tried to take her. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to shut her up in court. They wanted her gone, and that terrified her more than anything. A low voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Long night. Janelle's head jerked up. A man had slid into the seat across from her. She tensed, ready to run, until she saw his face. It was Weston. She exhaled sharply. You shouldn't sneak up on people like that. Weston smirked slightly. You shouldn't make yourself such an easy target. Janelle glared. Excuse me. Weston leaned forward. You led them right to you. Janelle clenched her fists. You think I don't know that? I shut off my phone. Weston shook his head. Too late. They already got what they needed. Janelle's stomach twisted. Which is? Weston's expression darkened. They are more dangerous to them than they realized. Janelle swallowed hard. Who are they? Weston hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, a private organization. Not the government, not officially, but they have powerful connections in law enforcement, the legal system, and even politics. Janelle's blood ran cold. And they're protecting Judge Grayson? Weston nodded. Not just him. He's just a pawn. There are dozens of people like him. Judges, prosecutors, cops, all working under the same system. Your case? It was never just about Marcus Willis. You stumbled onto something much bigger. Janelle's mind reeled. So what now? Do I just disappear like you wanted? Weston shook his head. No. He leaned in, lowering his voice. We do what you wanted to do from the start. We expose them. Janelle frowned. And how we do that? Weston pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and slid it across the table. Janelle hesitated, then picked it up. Her eyes widened as she read the address. This is a courthouse records building. Weston nodded. One that holds sealed documents. Documents that could prove exactly who's been making sure people like Marcus Willis never stand a chance in court. Janelle's pulse quickened. This is the evidence we need. Weston's eyes locked onto hers. It's a start, but getting in won't be easy. Janelle smirked. When is it ever? She set the paper down, her decision already made. If they wanted to silence her, they were going to have to try a lot harder. She wasn't just fighting this case anymore. She was bringing the whole system down, and nothing was going to stop her. Outside the diner, A black SUV sat parked a block away. Inside, a man in a suit watched through a pair of binoculars. He lowered them slowly, then pulled out his phone. "She's still moving," he said. A deep voice on the other end responded. "Then make sure she doesn't move for much longer." The man in the SUV nodded once. Then he started the engine. Janelle didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The men in suits, the chase through the alley, the syringe, they had tried to take her. That wasn't just intimidation. That was a clear message. You're in the way, and you won't be for much longer. She wasn't sure how much longer she had before they tried again. Her fingers clenched around the paper Weston had given her. The courthouse records building. That was where the truth was buried. And if she could get to it before they did, she might have a chance of exposing everything. Her phone sat on a nightstand, still turned off. She had no way of knowing if they were still tracking her, but she wasn't going to take any chances. Her stomach twisted as she glanced toward the window. Something wasn't right. She stood slowly and walked over, carefully pulling back the curtain just an inch, enough to see outside. Her breath caught in her throat. The black SUV was still there. It hadn't moved. They were waiting, watching. Her hand shook, but she forced herself to stay calm. They hadn't made a move yet, which meant they were waiting for something. Or someone. A sharp knock on her door made her jump. She spun around, her pulse skyrocketing. Another knock. Harder this time. She grabbed the stun gun from her nightstand and crept toward the door. "Who is it?" she called, keeping her voice steady. No response. Her stomach churned. Then another knock. 3 precise raps, followed by silence. Janelle swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the stun gun. This was bad. She glanced toward the window again. The SUV was still there. But now, there was a second one. Panic surged through her veins. She couldn't stay here. Taking a deep breath, she moved quickly. She grabbed her phone, wallet, and keys, stuffing them into her bag. Then, she headed toward the back door of her apartment. She needed to disappear before they came inside. Just as she reached the back door, she heard it. Crack. The front door splintered open. Janelle's heart stopped. They were inside. She didn't wait. She threw open the back door and ran. The cold night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. She sprinted down the alley behind her building, her feet pounding against the pavement. Footsteps thundered behind her. They were chasing her. She rounded a corner, her breath ragged. There, a side street. If she could make it to the main road, she might be able to disappear into the city. Then, a black SUV screeched around the corner, cutting her off. Janelle's heart pounded. She turned the other way, but another SUV appeared, blocking her escape. She was trapped. The first SUV's doors flew open. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. One of them, the same man from before, the one with the syringe, smirked. "Now, Miss Carter," he said smoothly, "let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Janelle backed away, her fingers still clenched around the stun gun in her pocket. She could try to fight, but against 3 men? She didn't stand a chance. She needed an opening. The second man stepped forward. "Get in the car, and no one gets hurt." Janelle's mind raced. Think. Her eyes flicked toward the buildings around her. Then, she saw it. A fire escape. She had one shot. Before they could react, she bolted toward the fire escape. "Stop her," one of the men shouted. Janelle jumped, grabbing onto the metal ladder. A hand snatched at her ankle. She kicked hard, breaking free, and scrambled up the ladder just as one of the men lunged. She climbed fast, her muscles burning. Below, she heard them cursing. One of them pulled out a gun. Crack! A bullet whizzed past her, shattering a window. Janelle's breath hitched. She threw herself onto the rooftop, rolling onto her side, just as another shot rang out. Then silence. Her chest heaved. She lay there for a second, staring up at the dark sky. She had made it. For now. Janelle didn't stop moving until she was miles away. She ditched her coat, changed directions 3 times, and finally took shelter in an old, abandoned warehouse near the docks. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Her hand shook as she pulled out her phone. She hesitated, then turned it back on. She had 6 missed calls from Weston, and 1 text from Eric. "Eric, you're in deep, Janelle. I found something. Call me." She didn't waste a second. Eric picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" he asked urgently. "Alive," she breathed. "For now." Eric exhaled sharply. "Listen to me. I found out who's backing Judge Grayson." Janelle sat up straight. "Who?" There was a pause. Then, in a low voice, Eric said, "The governor." Janelle's blood ran cold. "The governor?" she whispered. Eric's voice was tense. "Governor Richard Calloway. He's been orchestrating everything. The trials, the judges, the police corruption. It's all tied to him." Janelle's mind reeled. Governor Calloway was one of the most powerful men in the state. If he was behind this wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. This was war. Janelle swallowed hard. "Eric, if Calloway knows we're on to him." "He knows," Eric cut in grimly. "And he's coming for you." Janelle felt the weight of those words settle over her like a storm cloud. She had just barely escaped tonight. Next time, she might not be so lucky. Janelle sat in the darkness of the abandoned warehouse, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Governor Richard Calloway, the governor of the entire state, was behind this. Her breath felt shallow, her thoughts racing. She had spent her career fighting corrupt judges and prosecutors, but this was something else entirely. The man who controlled the courts, the police, the entire justice system was the one pulling the strings. And now, he wanted her gone. Eric's voice came through the phone, low and tense. "Janelle, listen to me. If Calloway is behind this, you don't have much time. You need to disappear." Janelle swallowed hard. "No." Eric hesitated. "No." Janelle's hands trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "I'm not running. Not now. If Calloway is protecting Grayson and the others, that means he's afraid of something. That means we have a chance to bring him down." Eric exhaled sharply. "Janelle, these people don't just ruin careers. They eliminate threats." Janelle clenched her jaw. "Good. Then I'll be the biggest threat they've ever seen." Silence. Then, Eric let out a low chuckle. "You're insane." "Maybe." Janelle's lips curled into a smirk. "But I'm right." Eric sighed. "Fine. You want to fight? Then we fight. But we need evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Calloway is running this operation." Janelle's fingers tightened around the phone. "The courthouse records," she said. "Weston told me that's where we'll find what we need." Eric hesitated. "Breaking into a government building? That's extreme." Janelle arched an eyebrow. "So, is trying to kidnap a defense attorney in broad daylight." Eric sighed. "Fair point. All right, I'll do some digging, find the best way in. But Janelle, if we do this, there's no turning back." Janelle's expression hardened. "I don't want to turn back." She ended the call and took a deep breath. No more running. It was time to end this. An hour later, Janelle met Weston in a deserted parking garage. The dim lights flickered above them, casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls. Weston leaned against a black sedan, his arms crossed. "You look like hell." Janelle smirked. "You should see the guys who try to grab me." Weston let out a short laugh, but then turned serious. "Eric, fill me in. Governor Calloway, huh?" Janelle nodded. "If we take him down, the whole system crumbles." Weston exhaled. "You're playing with fire." Janelle lifted her chin. "Then let's burn it down." Weston studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, here's the deal. The courthouse records building is locked up tighter than a bank vault. But I have a contact, a former security officer who used to work there. He can get us inside." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" Weston's jaw tightened. "The building is under surveillance. Calloway's people will know the second we step inside." Janelle clenched her fists. "Then we get in and out before they can stop us." Weston sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You really don't do things the easy way, do you?" Janelle grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" 1:47 a.m. Janelle crouched behind a parked van, staring at the courthouse records building. It was a massive, gray structure, surrounded by security cameras and armed guards. A place that held decades of sealed case files. Files that could destroy Calloway's entire network. If they could get inside. Weston knelt beside her, whispering, "Our guy is inside. He'll open the back entrance for exactly 60 seconds. If we're not through that door by then, we're screwed." Janelle nodded. "Understood." Eric's voice crackled in her earpiece. He was watching from a nearby rooftop, feeding them intel. 2 guards at the front entrance, 3 at the side, cameras covering the main hallways. But the back entrance? That's our only shot. Janelle exhaled. Then let's move. 1:49 a.m. Janelle and Weston moved fast, sticking to the shadows. The street was eerily quiet, the city asleep, but the danger was very much awake. They reached the back of the building just as the door clicked open. A middle-aged man in a security uniform stood there, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You've got 60 seconds," he whispered. "Go!" Janelle and Weston slipped inside. The door shut behind them. Inside, the air was thick with silence. The hallways were lined with metal filing cabinets and secured vaults. Janelle's heart pounded. This was it. Weston led the way, moving swiftly toward the archive room. "The files we need should be in Section 3B, he whispered. Janelle followed, her eyes darting to the security cameras overhead. Eric's voice crackled in her ear. "I'm looping the camera feed, but you have 3 minutes before the system resets." Janelle and Weston reached the archive room. The massive metal door stood in front of them, a keypad blinking red. Weston swore under his breath. "It's locked." Janelle's heart sank. "Can you get open?" Weston pulled out a small hacking device. "I can try, but it'll take at least 2 minutes." They didn't have 2 minutes. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Janelle's blood ran cold. Someone was coming. Weston worked furiously on the keypad, his fingers moving fast. Come on, come on." Janelle clenched her fists. She could hear the footsteps getting closer. Then, beep, the metal door unlocked. "Go!" Weston pushed it open, and they both slipped inside. The archive room was massive. Rows and rows of case files, stacked to the ceiling. Janelle grabbed a flashlight and scanned the shelves. "What are we looking for?" Weston pulled out a folder from his jacket and flipped through it. "We need any cases marked with Calloway's personal seal. It'll be a gold emblem on the top corner." Janelle moved fast, scanning the shelves. Her fingers brushed over file after file until she found one. A thick folder, gold emblem on the corner. Her stomach flipped as she read the label. "Case No. 18 to 342, State v. Marcus Willis." Her breath caught. This was Marcus's case. And beneath it, dozens more, all marked with Calloway's seal. Weston's eyes widened. Holy hell! Janelle's pulse pounded. This was it, the proof they needed. Then, the alarm blared. Her stomach dropped. "They know we're here," Weston muttered. Janelle grabbed as many files as she could. "Then let's get out before they bury us with the truth." Footsteps thundered toward the archive room. Janelle's breath hitched. No way out. No backup. Just her, Weston, and the truth they weren't supposed to find. The blaring alarm screamed through the courthouse, echoing off the steel filing cabinets and concrete walls. Janelle's heart pounded. She clutched the files to her chest, her fingers tightening around the proof that could destroy Governor Calloway and his entire operation. But now they were trapped. Weston's jaw clenched. He shoved his gun into his waistband and spun toward the entrance. "We need an exit. Now." Janelle scanned the room. There were no windows, no emergency exits, only the heavy steel door they had come through. And on the other side, footsteps, getting closer. A radio crackled in the distance. Security Team 1 locked down the north wing. No one gets out. Janelle's stomach twisted. Weston cursed. They're moving in fast. Janelle shoved the files in her bag and zipped it up. They cannot be caught. Her mind raced. Think. Then, her eyes locked onto a ventilation grate near the floor. That's it. She dropped to her knees and pried at the grate with her fingers. The metal creaked, resisting for a second before popping loose. She looked up at Weston. "We're going through here." Weston stared at the vent, then at her. "You're joking." Janelle wasn't joking. She slid inside first, twisting her body into the narrow metal tunnel. It was tight, claustrophobic, but she forced herself to keep moving. Weston grumbled under his breath, but followed. The vent was cramped and dark, but at least it was leading away from the guards. Janelle crawled fast, her breath coming in short gasps. The metal groaned beneath their weight. Then, voices below them. She froze. Two guards stood right underneath the vent, talking. Janelle's pulse skyrocketed. Weston stopped behind her. Neither of them moved. Any sign of them? One guard asked. Nothing yet, the other replied. But Governor Calloway gave the order, shoot to kill if necessary. Janelle's stomach dropped. This wasn't an arrest. This was an execution. She bit her lip, forcing herself to stay still as the guards' voices faded. After a long, agonizing minute, she kept moving. She followed the vent until she reached another grate. An exit. She kicked it open and dropped down into a dimly lit storage room. Weston landed beside her a second later. They had escaped the archive room, but they weren't safe yet. Janelle pressed her ear against the door. The hallway outside was silent. She turned to Weston. We need a way out of the building. Weston nodded, pulling out a blueprint from his jacket. According to this, there's a loading dock 2 floors down. Janelle exhaled. Then that's where we go. She cracked open the door. All clear. They moved fast and low, ducking behind walls, avoiding cameras. Every hallway, every turn brought fresh danger. Twice, they had to hide in the shadows as security teams passed by, rifles at the ready. Janelle's hands trembled, but she kept moving. Finally, they reached the stairwell. She pushed open the door and ran straight into a guard. For half a second, no one moved. Then, the guard reached for his radio. I found them. Janelle reacted instinctively. She grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and slammed his head into the railing. The guard collapsed unconscious. Weston let out a low whistle. Remind me not to get on your bad side. Janelle ignored him. She grabbed the guard's ID badge and sprinted down the stairs. One floor down, then another. Finally, they reached the loading dock. A single exit door stood ahead. Janelle swiped the stolen ID card. A green light flashed. The lock clicked open. For one brief second, relief washed over her. They had made it. Then, bang, the door flew open. An armed men poured inside. Janelle froze. Calloway's men. They had been waiting. A tall figure stepped forward. Governor Calloway himself. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, his silver hair slicked back. His cold blue eyes locked onto Janelle, amusement flickering across his face. Miss Carter, he drawled. I was wondering when you'd show up. Janelle's breath hitched. This was bad. Calloway clasped his hands behind his back, his expression calm. You really should have walked away when you had a chance. Janelle's hands clenched into fists. Too bad I don't scare easy. Calloway chuckled. Oh, I know. That's why I'm afraid I'll have to make an example out of you. Janelle's pulse pounded. Weston shifted beside her. We're not leaving without those files. Calloway sighed, shaking his head. That's where you're wrong. He gestured toward his men. Guns raised. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. There was no way out. She had made it this far, only to be caught at the finish line. Her mind screamed for a way out, a plan, anything. Then, a sudden explosion rocked the building. Calloway stumbled, his men turning in confusion. The ground shook as smoke and dust filled the air. A second later, gunfire erupted from outside. Janelle's eyes widened. What the hell was happening? Then, through the smoke, a shadowy figure stepped into view, dressed in tactical gear, holding a rifle. Janelle's jaw dropped. It was Eric, and behind him, a full team of FBI agents. Calloway's face twisted in rage. No! Eric raised his gun. Governor Calloway, he said, his voice deadly calm. You're under arrest. The chaos exploded. Calloway's men tried to fight, but the FBI was faster. Gunfire roared through the loading dock. Weston grabbed Janelle's wrist. Come on. They ran. Bullets whizzed past. Smoke choked the air. Janelle clutched her bag, the files still safe. They had everything. She saw Calloway being tackled to the ground, his face twisted in fury. For the first time, he had lost. Janelle stumbled outside into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Weston was beside her. So was Eric, a satisfied grin on his face. They had done it. Calloway was finished. The system he had built? It was about to come crashing down. Janelle's legs wobbled as she stumbled into the open air, her lungs burning from the smoke still thick in the night. The flashing red and blue lights of the FBI vehicles cast an eerie glow over the chaos behind her. Calloway was on the ground, his face pressed into the pavement, his expensive suit ruined. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The mighty Governor Calloway, the man who controlled the courts, the police, the entire justice system, was done. Janelle should have felt relief, but she didn't. Not yet. She clutched the bag of stolen case files, her fingers tightening around the truth they had risked everything to uncover. It wasn't over. Not until the world knew. Weston exhaled beside her, rolling his shoulders like a man who had just cheated death. Remind me never to break into a government building with you again. Janelle let out a short, breathless laugh. I didn't hear you complaining when we were running for our lives. Weston smirked. Fair point. Eric approached, pulling off his tactical vest, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. We got Calloway. We got his men. But this isn't over yet. Janelle nodded. We need to release these files now, before someone tries to bury them. Eric pulled out his phone and began dialing. I have reporters waiting. We go public in the next 2 hours. Janelle's stomach tightened. 2 hours. That's how much time they had before the people who had protected Calloway for years realized their empire was crumbling. Weston crossed his arms. They'll try to stop this. Janelle lifted her chin. Let them try. 2 hours later. Breaking news. Janelle sat in the back of an unmarked FBI vehicle, watching the news broadcast from a small laptop. The screen flickered, revealing a shaken news anchor. In a stunning turn of events, Governor Richard Calloway has been arrested on federal charges, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and judicial corruption. The arrest comes after a secret investigation uncovered evidence linking Calloway to a widespread scheme involving rigged trials, wrongful convictions, and political bribery. Janelle exhaled. It was happening. The whole world was seeing what had been hidden for years. The screen cut to a live press conference. A federal prosecutor stood at the podium, holding a thick file, one of the very files Janelle had stolen. The evidence we have obtained is overwhelming, the prosecutor stated firmly. This corruption runs deep, but justice will be served. No one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Janelle's throat tightened. Marcus. She turned to Weston. Marcus needs to be released. Now. Weston nodded. Already in motion. Janelle's chest ached. It was almost over. Almost. 6 hours later. The courthouse was eerily quiet. Janelle stood beside Marcus Willis, watching as the metal prison gates slid open. Marcus stepped out, blinking against the early morning sun. He looked stunned. Janelle swallowed hard, her heart pounding. You're free. Marcus let out a shaky breath, looking at her like he couldn't believe it. You did it. Janelle shook her head. We did it. Marcus' eyes glistened. I thought this system would never let me out. Janelle felt her throat tighten. For so long, that had been the truth. But not anymore. She smiled. It's a new day, Marcus. Marcus inhaled deeply, as if tasting freedom for the first time. Then, without warning, he pulled her into a tight hug. Janelle's breath hitched. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, she allowed herself to feel it. The weight lifting. The battle won. 1 week later, the fallout was massive. Governor Calloway was finished. Judge Grayson had been indicted. More arrests were happening every day. Corrupt officials, dirty cops, prosecutors who had buried evidence for years. The justice system was finally cleaning house. Janelle stood on the steps of the courthouse, staring at the sea of reporters waiting for a statement. Eric nudged her. Ready for this? Janelle smirked. After everything we've been through, this is the easy part. She stepped forward, cameras flashing, microphones pushing toward her. She took a deep breath, and then she spoke. The justice system is supposed to protect people, not destroy them. For too long, corruption has stolen innocent lives, wrongfully convicting men and women who never had a chance to fight back. That ends today. No one is untouchable. No one is above the law. And to every person out there who has suffered under this system, we see you. We fight for you. And we're never backing down again. The world listened. And for the first time in a long time, justice was served. Janelle had never liked the spotlight. She was a fighter, not a politician. A defense attorney, not a celebrity. But now, standing in front of millions watching on live television, she knew she had no choice. Her speech had ignited something. The moment her words left her lips, the world exploded. News stations ran the footage on repeat. Social media erupted. Protests broke out across the country, people demanding more arrests, more accountability. And for the first time in decades, the system was shaking. Janelle should have been relieved. Instead, she was watching her back. Because when you tear down corruption, the people who built it don't go down quietly. 3 days later, the bulletproof SUV felt suffocating. Janelle sat in the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap as the vehicle weaved through Washington, D.C. traffic. Weston was beside her, his gaze sharp, on edge. Eric sat in the front passenger seat, tapping furiously on his phone. The DOJ is preparing federal charges against at least 20 more officials. He glanced back at Janelle. You started a revolution. Janelle exhaled. Good. Weston didn't look so sure. We stirred the hornet's nest. Janelle already knew that. She had felt it. The unease, the lingering presence of danger, the way powerful men in dark suits still whispered her name like a curse. Taking down Calloway was only the beginning. She glanced out the window. A black sedan had been following them for 3 blocks. Her stomach tightened. She turned to Weston. That car. I see it, Weston murmured. The driver, an FBI agent, suddenly swerved left down a quiet street. The black sedan followed. Janelle's pulse spiked. Eric cursed. We've got a tail. Weston's jaw clenched. Not for long. The driver hit the gas. The SUV lurched forward, weaving through traffic. The black sedan kept up. Too fast. Too precise. Janelle knew exactly what this was. Not a warning. A hit. The SUV swerved violently, tires screeching against the asphalt. Janelle braced herself against the door as the black sedan pulled up beside them. Then, gunfire. A hail of bullets tore through the side of the vehicle. Janelle ducked, her heart hammering. They're shooting at us. Weston grabbed his gun. They're trying to take us out before we can do any more damage. Janelle refused to let that happen. The driver took another sharp turn, but the sedan was relentless. Eric cursed. We need to lose them. Janelle's mind raced. She grabbed the files from her bag and shoved them at Eric. If something happens to me, make sure these get out. Eric's eyes widened. Janelle. The SUV slammed into the curb. The impact sent Janelle flying forward, her seatbelt digging into her chest. Then, crash. The SUV collided with another car, spinning wildly before coming to a grinding halt. Janelle's vision blurred. Her head throbbed. Through the haze, she saw figures approaching, armed, moving fast. Her blood ran cold. Weston groaned beside her, trying to reach for his gun. Eric was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, dazed. Janelle forced herself to move, pain searing through her body. The men in black suits reached the door, yanked it open. A tall man with icy blue eyes loomed over her. We warned you, he murmured. Then, a gun pressed against her temple. Janelle's breath hitched. Her mind screamed, not like this. Not after everything. She clenched her fists, preparing to fight. Then, bang. The man jerked forward, his body slumping to the ground. Janelle's eyes snapped up. A sniper. A single well-placed shot had taken him out. Chaos erupted. The remaining men scattered, returning fire as more black SUVs sped onto the scene. The doors flew open, and agents in tactical gear poured out. Janelle's vision blurred, but she saw one figure stepping forward. Director James Holloway, the head of the FBI. He holstered his weapon, his sharp gaze landing on Janelle. Miss Carter. Janelle struggled to sit up, blood dripping down her temple. About time, she muttered. Holloway gave a small smirk. You have no idea. 1 hour later, Janelle sat in a secure federal safe house, a cup of black coffee in front of her. Weston was bruised but breathing. Eric was getting stitched up by a medic. Holloway stood at the head of the room, his arms crossed. Governor Calloway was only one piece of this. There's still a network working in the shadows. Janelle exhaled. Then let's finish the job. Holloway's expression was unreadable. You really don't back down, do you? Janelle smirked. No, I don't. Holloway nodded. Good. Because we have a name. Janelle's stomach twisted. A name. Holloway handed her a file. She flipped it open. Her heart stopped. The name on the paper made her blood freeze. Because it wasn't a judge, or a prosecutor, or a cop. It was a senator. Senator William Bradford, one of the most powerful politicians in the country. Janelle's breath shook. This goes higher than we thought, Weston muttered. Janelle closed the file. She had thought they had reached the top of the chain. But now, they had just found the real king. And if Governor Calloway had tried to kill them to keep his secrets buried, what would a United States senator do? Janelle exhaled slowly. She already knew the answer. She was about to step into the most dangerous battle yet. And this time, the whole country was watching. Janelle sat in the dimly lit FBI safe house, staring at the name on the file in front of her. Senator William Bradford. This wasn't just about Governor Calloway anymore. It had never been. The real mastermind, the one who had built and protected this corrupt empire, was a United States senator. And Janelle Carter had just become his biggest problem. She took a slow, steady breath. Or do we take him down? Director Holloway didn't hesitate. With everything we've got. 3 days later, Janelle sat in a secure government facility, surrounded by FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and intelligence officials. The room buzzed with tension. On the massive screen in front of them, a live news broadcast played. Breaking news tonight. An explosive federal investigation has revealed a deep network of corruption spanning from the courtroom to the highest levels of government. Senator William Bradford is now facing charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and racketeering after evidence surfaced linking him to a secret system of rigged trials and wrongful convictions. Janelle exhaled slowly. It was happening. The files they had retrieved from the courthouse. Proof of everything. Bradford had been pulling the strings for years, placing judges like Calloway in power, bribing police officers, and ensuring that certain cases never saw justice. Now, the world knew the truth. Janelle glanced at Weston, who leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Didn't think I'd live to see the day. Janelle smirked. Me neither. Across the room, Eric tapped furiously on his laptop. The Senate Ethics Committee is moving for immediate suspension. The FBI already has a team at Bradford's residence, ready to bring him in. Janelle watched as the live footage on the screen cut to Bradford's mansion, surrounded by law enforcement vehicles. A moment later, the front doors swung open. Senator William Bradford stepped out, flanked by his lawyers, his expression unreadable. Cameras flashed wildly as federal agents approached. Then, in front of the entire country, a pair of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Janelle let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It was over. 1 week later, Janelle stood outside the courthouse, watching the sun rise over the city. For the first time in years, she felt light. The battle was over. Bradford was facing life in prison. Governor Calloway was already convicted. Judge Grayson and his network of corrupt officials, gone. Most importantly, Marcus Willis was free. Janelle turned as Marcus walked up beside her. He was dressed in clean clothes, his face no longer shadowed by fear. It still doesn't feel real, he admitted, shaking his head. I spent so long believing the system would never let me out. Janelle smiled softly. You're out now, and they can't hurt you anymore. Marcus met her gaze. They would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you. Janelle chuckled. I had a little help. She looked back at Weston and Eric, who stood nearby, watching. Weston smirked. So, what now, Carter? You gonna run for office? Janelle snorted. Absolutely not. Eric raised an eyebrow. Then what? Janelle turned back to the city, her expression unreadable. For years, she had fought against a rigged system, one that had destroyed lives in the name of power. She had torn it down, but now, she had to help rebuild it. She looked at her team, her friends, and smiled. I keep fighting. Epilogue. 1 month later, Janelle Carter sat in her new office, papers scattered across her desk. Not as a defense attorney, not as a victim of a broken system, but as a special prosecutor, appointed to ensure that the same corruption she had fought never happened again. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, listening to Eric's voice on the other end. There's a new case, he said, and I think you'll want to see this. Janelle smiled. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready, and this time, justice would win.